So one country that's been cracking down hard on loot boxes is the UK. You may recall that back in June 2019, they held a hearing with folks from Epic and EA in which members of parliament questioned them about their loot box practices, their monetization practices. That's where we got this lady right here from EA saying that they're not loot boxes, they are surprise mechanics, and she also said, quote,
"These kind of mechanics, and FIFA, of course, is our big one, our FIFA Ultimate Team and our packs, is actually quite ethical and quite fun."
Nobody buys that bullshit, of course. I mean, just plain and simply, the parliament, the members of parliament just scoffed at this entire ordeal, at everything these representatives from these greedy corporations had to say. After that, we got this report from the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Committee in the UK. They released an 84-page report, which looks something like this. And one major section highlighted monetization aspects, especially those that resemble gambling. And it's this long-ass report. I talked about this in a previous video. But they essentially deliberated that it's time for loot boxes to be treated as gambling. It's time to scrutinize game companies for their shady monetization antics. That finally brings us to today's news, which was first relayed by BBC. It reads right here, Anne Longfield is publishing a small-scale report today called Gaming the System, which looks into what online gaming is like for children. So what this report did was essentially interview a bunch of kids who play games and ask them to kind of provide their feedback on what their experience has been like playing some of the most popular monetized titles out there right now. So the report looks something like this. It's from the Children's Commissioner, Gaming the System, released on October 2019. It's like 30-something pages long, but I've highlighted the most important bits, and I'd like to read these bits to you guys and share my thoughts, because I think this is a really balanced report that highlights the positives of gaming, but also a lot of the negatives, especially with some of the emerging monetization systems. So it begins right here with a lot of the positive elements, how children have a lot of fun, they interact with each other a lot more with these video games, they socialize through video games, they get very creative with video games. You know, Minecraft is really popular and encourages a lot of creativity and cooperation. So it's not saying that video games are all bad, they highlight some of the good stuff, but then they delve into the social harms and the negative experiences of online gaming. So this right here is a quote from Nina, who is 10 years old and is a Fortnite player. She said, quote, "If you're a default skin, people think you're trash." So default skin is the default cosmetic character that you get when you first boot up Fortnite. So basically, if you don't spend money to get outside of that default skin to obtain some of the more coveted skins in the game, the kids especially will essentially treat you like you're not a cool kid. You know, that's just, there's sort of this social pressure with Fortnite, especially for children who have these social cliques depending on how high up the ladder you are in Fortnite based on the cosmetics that you have. So it reads right here, children are scorned in games such as Fortnite if they are seen to wear the default skin, the free avatar they receive at the start of the game. Children say they feel embarrassed if they cannot afford new skins because then their friends see them as poor, and that embarrassment causes them to be pressured into asking their parents to spend money, a lot of money, on these cosmetics, which cost a lot of money. They aren't just a couple dollars, they're, you know, $20 and whatnot. And so that's how these children end up spending so much money on one game. There's that social aspect, that social pressure that game companies are well aware of. Scrolling down here, we get a section whose headline reads, monetization is where online gaming starts to look less like play and more like gambling. And this is according to a lot of the children that this commission interviewed. They report that they felt like the game was pressuring them into spending money on this stuff, and they felt like they were playing a game of chance where they were gambling to spend all this money to see if they got something good or not, and more likely than not, they didn't really get anything that they felt was of any value. So here's what this portion reads like, the amount of money children spend on games varies. In some cases, the amount of money children report spending on games has increased annually, with some spending over £300 in 1 year. Peer pressure from friends and online strangers, as well as influence from famous gaming YouTubers, are all factors that children say lead to them feeling pressured to spend money on in-game purchases. So you know those YouTubers who dedicate their entire channels to essentially opening loot boxes and acting all super excited? I mean, obviously, the YouTubers who are paid to open these loot boxes, whether it be through ads on YouTube or by the companies who encourage them to open loot boxes because of the influence they have, you know, they get to live the life opening these loot boxes because they don't suffer the adverse effects of financially bankrupting yourself to get the most coveted items in a game. Unlike the YouTubers, the average citizen doesn't get paid to open these loot boxes. They're spending their hard-earned money on this stuff. And a big part of why they feel that necessity to spend money on these loot boxes or microtransactions is because a lot of these YouTubers will encourage that with, you know, their fake reactions and their just dedication to highlighting just the fun of opening these loot boxes, spinning that slot machine, making the people watching feel that sense of either jealousy or that sense of need to obtain the items that the YouTubers obtain when they show this really rare item that few others can obtain. And, you know, there are reports of companies who tweak the odds specifically for the YouTubers so that they can make these videos showing them obtaining the rare stuff. From there, the report here continued. Game design also encourages spending. In games such as FIFA, children can either improve by investing significant time to build up their squad or spend money in the hope of quickly advancing their position. The latter option, to spend money in the hope of progressing, is the most popular option across the sample. With new editions of FIFA being released every year, children feel as though there is an expectation and pressure to buy new players, spend money, and build up their team as quickly as possible. Tim, who is 16 years old and plays FIFA, said, "It takes a long time to get somewhere, so you just do that. Open player packs." And then on the topic of loot boxes, Tim also added, "It's like gambling. You could lose your money and not get anyone good, or get someone really good." So yeah, this segment right here highlights how players who don't spend end up having to just grind insufferably in exhausting fashion because the game was designed to be grindy for those who don't pay up. The game punishes those who don't spend money. So people feel that pressure to spend because otherwise they're just not going to be able to catch up to other players who are progressing much faster by spending money on these pay-to-win card packs. And then there is the fact that because FIFA is released every year, because it's an annualized franchise, you only have that 1 year to obtain the best players possible before this year's FIFA becomes obsolete and the next one comes out. And that next one, because you cannot transfer over your old stuff, it wipes the slate clean. So that annual cycle combines both setting a time limit that pressures players into getting card packs as fast as possible and the resetting of the slate so that players have to rebuy everything, so that everything they spent money on in last year's entry becomes worthless. The report then highlighted this: the lack of guaranteed reward from these purchases can leave some children feeling as though they have wasted their money. The potential to receive a good reward means that children also feel that they are not in control of their spending and sometimes try to chase losses. In general, children do not have effective strategies to manage their online spending. Here's Lee, who is 14 years old, a FIFA player. He said, "I never get anything out of it, buying packs, but I still do it." They're hooked to these systems, even though they know that they're probably not going to get anything good. They feel compelled to open these packs because of the psychological manipulation that goes on with these loot boxes, all the visual and auditory effects that activate that feeling of adrenaline, of a rush that some people find addictive. Plus, there is the game itself. pressuring players into spending because to get good at the game or to be in a high status in that game, whether it be through cosmetics or through microtransactions that improve your gameplay standing, these children just feel like they have to spend and spend and spend. And then Nick right here, a 16-year-old FIFA player, added, "You feel like it's a waste of money and then you open more." So again, highlighting that even though a lot of these people are aware that they're probably wasting their money away, there's something psychologically compelling them to keep pulling that lever for that slot machine, to keep trying again and again because of that notion of next time, maybe, just maybe, I'll get the thing that I want. And that keeps them coming back and hooked to this crap. So the deliberation that the Children's Commission made in this report reads as follows. If gaming is an online extension of children's offline lives, then the rules should be the same. Adults who gamble often tend to have boundaries and control measures in place to mitigate against harm. Children are unlikely to be able to put these in place for themselves. If there are concerns around exposure to gambling at an early age offline, then those same concerns should translate into the online world. Now, it's important to note that adults can also face similar addiction struggles with loot boxes, with the psychological elements that they impose that are similar to gambling, but adults tend to have more of a chance of having more control over those impulses. With children, they're much more vulnerable. They're definitely more of a special case because their minds are still developing, and you can read right here that they just cannot control themselves. A lot of these kids who play FIFA and Fortnite, they just cannot help feel the pressure to spend, whether it be through social pressure or through gameplay pressure. Moving on, we have policy recommendations from the report. So it reads right here, limiting the role of money. There has been some action from industry to address harms associated with loot boxes, but these measures do not go far enough. I could not agree more. One obstacle to progress in this space is the current legal definition of gambling. Gambling laws need updating to reflect the reality of children's experiences of spending money within games. Basically, update gambling law so that they also encompass video games and loot boxes because they behave exactly like gambling. And then from there, we have a few highlights in terms of what the Children's Commission believes should be the next step. Developers and platforms should not enable children to progress within a game by spending money. Spending should be limited to items which are not linked to performance, e.g. aesthetic items such as new outfits. So it's bad enough that the cosmetics bring about a social pressure, especially if a game is as popular as Fortnite, but the pay-to-win stuff, the card packs that really just put you at a disadvantage if you don't pay up, that stuff's even more manipulative. And then right here, the report adds that video games should implement features for players to track their historic spend. So one of the reasons that people spend so much on microtransactions is because they spend little bits at a time and they don't see the full picture of how much all of that adds up to. They think, oh, I spend, $10, $15 here and there. It's probably not that much money, but they don't keep track of the long-term spending. They don't keep track of the overall spending, how much that ultimately amounts to. They lose sight of that, and before they know it, they've spent $1,000. Some have spent $10,000 even, some way more than that. So the game showing you constantly how much you've spent in total at the forefront of a game's menus, constantly reminding you, here's how much you've spent, could go a long way in making people go, oh crap, I've actually spent more than I thought, I'll stop spending for now. So that's, I think, a good measure to implement. Number 4 right here reads, maximum daily spend limits should be introduced in all games which feature in-game spending and turned on by default for children. This is also something that I can agree with. If you set a cap, then it'll certainly make it far less likely that people will spend thousands of dollars in in-game purchases. Because right now, as games currently are, somebody could, if they wanted to, spend $10,000 in a single day because there's no cap. Number 5 reads, parents should speak to children about the ways in which game companies monetize their products. That is absolutely important for parents to inform their kids, to educate them about this stuff. But the problem is that a lot of parents are currently misinformed about all of this because the video game industry itself doesn't do a good job at informing parents. They try to pull one over and act like this is all fun and ethical, say these are surprise mechanics. They won't label these things as gambling, even though they are. They'll label their games as E for everyone, despite featuring simulated and real gambling. All of that stuff contributes to parents being misinformed and not having the ability to talk to their children about this stuff because they themselves don't know that this stuff's happening in the video games industry. Finally, this segment of the report concludes with a call to action that reads, the government should take immediate action to amend the definition of gaming in Section 6 of the Gambling Act 2005 to regulate loot boxes as gambling. The government must also undertake a wider review into the current definition of gambling in the Gambling Act to ensure that it accurately reflects new forms of gambling, including those forms found in online games. Essentially, these two excerpts are saying the law needs to catch up. The law is currently lagging behind these online games that are monetizing children and adults en masse with no restrictions. It's time for the gambling laws to catch up and cast a wider net, a wider umbrella. Because loot boxes are in fact gambling. The children spoke for themselves. They have talked about how this does feel like gambling. They're saying that right here. They can feel how scummy some of this stuff is. They're expressing that in this report. And these are just a few testimonials. If I scroll down further, I mean, you can see a few testimonials from, for example, this FIFA player, Nigel, who's 15. The excitement depends on what you've got. If you don't get anyone good, it makes you angry because you've wasted money, in reference to FIFA card packs. Right here, Brandon, 15, talks about how you just don't have the time. If you go to school, you don't have as much time to save coins. So a lot of these students, a lot of these kids, because of school and all the stuff going on in their lives, and the same goes for a lot of adults, they just don't have the time to grind out FIFA card packs. So that's another factor that forces them to spend money instead. And a lot of these companies like to call them time savers, except the companies themselves are purposely wasting our time so that they can sell us the solution as time savers. They are causing a problem purposely so they can sell us back the solution and act like they're being generous when they're just really being really sleazy. I'll leave it at that for now. If you scroll down further, there's a number of other great quotes worth reading. I'd recommend checking out this report, all 30-something pages. I will link this in the description below as one of my sources. This stuff's ramping up. This is a snowball that EA and companies similar to EA can no longer stop. Regulation is coming. I have no doubt about that. And this is, I think, the only way to stop these companies from continuing their shady antics. So yeah, there you have it, folks. This is one man's take on the Children's Commissioner's report on this whole issue. I'd love to hear what your thoughts and opinions are on all of this in the comments below. With that, I would like to end this news update and discussion video. Thank you for tuning in. To be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.